Welcome to the deep dive. You've shared something you're trying to get a handle on, and this time it's Jeff Thompson's The Pavement Arena.
Yeah.
Our job here is basically to cut through it, find those key insights, and leave you feeling like you've really grasped the core stuff without reading the whole thing cover to cover.
Exactly. We're your shortcuts, essentially. And today, we're diving into adapting karate specifically for real-world street situations
Mm-hmm.
based on Thompson's very, very practical take.
And it's important, right? Thompson isn't just some theorist. This guy has serious credentials. Sixth Dan karate, first Dan judo, instructor in other arts.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that really makes you listen, years working as a nightclub doorman. I mean, talk about real-world testing.
Absolutely. That's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it?
Hmm.
So the first big idea, maybe, is how this whole mystique around martial arts started.
Right, this idea that just doing karate automatically made you, like, street-proof.
Sort of, yeah. Thompson points out that early on, it was less common, more exclusive maybe.
Yeah.
So people just assumed practitioners were incredibly tough.
But then things changed. Bruce Lee happened.
Big time. Martial arts exploded. Suddenly, dojos popped up everywhere. Black belts weren't quite as rare.
And the quality varied.
That's putting it mildly. Thompson argues this commercialization really diluted the respect it once had. A black belt didn't automatically mean what people thought it meant anymore.
Okay, so the mystique faded. Then came competition karate. That seems like a logical step, testing skills.
It does, on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
But Thompson says this is where things really veered away from street reality.
How so?
Well, the focus shifted big time. It became about scoring points to win tournaments.
Ah, okay. So techniques that looked good, maybe fast and flashy for points?
Exactly. Even if they didn't have real stopping power. The rules also restricted a lot of the more, let's say, dangerous techniques, things you would use if you had to.
He even mentioned something called the dive, like getting disqualified on purpose.
Yeah, apparently that was a tactic sometimes. It sounds crazy, but it shows how far it drifted. And you had these old school fighters getting really disillusioned.
Because it wasn't about fighting anymore, really.
Not in the way they understood it. They started looking for full contact alternatives, something closer to, genuine self-defense training.
Which leads to that question he brings up, the one people still ask today, right?
Great.
He's great in the dojo, but can he actually handle himself on the street?
That nails it. That's the disconnect we're digging into.
So what's Thompson's answer? Just ditch traditional karate?
No, not necessarily. And this is really important. He argues it's more about changing your perception, your attitude, and how you apply the techniques you already have. It's not always about changing styles.
Okay, so adapt what's there, refocus it. Which brings us to his idea of addition and subtraction.
Precisely. It's not just cutting stuff out. You have to add things too. Knowledge, maybe some techniques missing from the standard syllabus.
And attitude.
Oh, definitely. That's maybe the biggest addition. But first, he really stresses the foundation. Those basic stances, endless repetition, partner work, kata, they're still vital.
If they're practiced correctly, he says.
Right. The quality of that basic training is everything. He uses some great analogies, actually.
Like the boxer skipping rope?
Yeah, or the skater doing ballet, the actor doing voice drills. Those things don't look like the final performance, do they?
No, not directly.
But they build the essential framework, the strength, the coordination, the mindset. It's about building that deep physical literacy that you draw on under pressure.
Got it. So the foundation is key. Then he talks about raw technique. What's that?
Basically, stripping your dojo techniques down to the bare essentials. No fancy bits, no wasted motion.
Why?
Speed, aggression. In a real situation, it's chaos. You need direct, decisive action. So you take your core technique and make it, raw, fast, powerful.
And he mentioned specific additions needed, like hooking punches and grappling.
Things often glossed over in standard karate training. Although, interestingly, he argues the seeds of those moves are actually in the kata already.
We'll come back to kata, I guess. But the biggest addition that he stresses
Is the attitude, that mental shift. Practicing with the mindset that my life might depend on this.
that sounds intense. How do you practice that?
He talks about sparring, specifically set sparring, where you actually try to hit your partner, controlled, obviously, but with intent.
Not just pulling punches or aiming for points.
Exactly. It generates a bit of genuine fear, in a controlled way. So you learn to recognize that feeling, manage it, push through it, because real fear can just freeze you up otherwise.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift gears to stances. those deep karate stances. Iconic, but often criticized.
Yeah, people say they're too low, too slow for the street, and Thompson agrees, up to a point.
Up to a point.
Well, he acknowledges they aren't practical for, like, moving around quickly in a fight. And, yeah, they make your legs a target.
So why practice them at all then?
For the benefits they build indirectly. Massive leg strength, endurance, and, maybe most importantly, willpower. Pushing through that burn, holding the stance that builds mental toughness.
Ah, okay, so the qualities developed are useful even if the stance itself isn't used directly on the street.
Precisely. Plus, the flexibility gained helps with kicking. But for actual fighting, he recommends what he calls a short or condensed street front stance.
More compact, more mobile.
Exactly. Solid base, but you can move quickly. He mentions other traditional stances too, saying they develop certain things in the dojo, but yeah, limited direct street use. Adaptability is key.
Right, adaptation. Okay, what about kicks? Karate kicks are famous, often high kicks. Thompson's take.
He's very pragmatic, let's say that. He admits kicks can be devastating, but only if the range and timing are perfect.
Which they rarely are on the street.
Pretty much. He questions why you'd force kicking distance when maybe a punch or something else is easier and safer.
Safer how?
His big warning is getting your foot grabbed. A grabbed foot means you're suddenly in grappling range, probably off balance, maybe going down. That's bad news.
He really emphasizes keeping both feet on the ground for stability, doesn't he?
He does. For movement, for power in your punches, for escaping, he shares some powerful stories too.
Like his own experience.
Yeah, and a friend, a really good karate guy, who found in a real fight, his legs just wouldn't work properly. Fear took over.
Wow. That shows the huge gap between dojo training and street reality.
Absolutely. And he's very critical of how kicks are often taught, especially that slow retraction after the kick.
The kind you see in competitions, holding it for a moment.
Exactly. He sees that as a massive liability, leaves you wide open to be grabbed, swept, attacked again. He also warns against hopping on one leg after kicking, and definitely against high kicks on uneven ground.
Falling on concrete is different from a mat.
Very different. So his advice, keep kicks low, sharp, aim for vulnerable spots below the belt, groin, thighs, knees, shins. Less protected, easier to reach.
Recover the leg instantly.
Instantly, and fast. He talks about the front kick, using the ball, heel, instep, even the toe if you have shoes on. Very versatile.
Roundhouse kick.
Yes, but stressing hip involvement for power. Back kick he sees as powerful but tricky, especially spinning versions, too much risk, poor visibility.
What about the stamp kick?
He describes that as quick, dangerous, very brutal. For life or death moments only, really. Lift the knee, stamp down hard. But he generally discourages things like back roundhouse, spinning back roundhouse for street use. Too risky.
So the takeaway for kicks is, use them sparingly, keep them low, get your foot back fast, and focus on the basics like front roundhouse, maybe stamp kick in extremis.
He practices them wearing normal clothes and shoes. That makes a difference too.
Good point. Okay, let's move to punches. Sounds like Thompson's doorman days really shifted his view on standard karate punching.
Oh, massively. He found those textbook front punches, reverse punches. They just weren't cutting it in the close, messy, frantic fights he saw.
Fights happen up close mostly.
Yeah, very often. Clinching, scrambling. He realized you absolutely need good short-range punching, close-in fighting skills, and grappling wasn't optional.
Which led him to boxing training.
Right. He trained with some serious coaches, learned about hooks, uppercuts, things that work when you're right on top of someone.
And he found those in kata later.
Sort of hidden, yeah. The principles were there, he realized, just not usually taught that way. So boxing opened his eyes to the versatility needed lead hand hooks, rear hand hooks, uppercuts at different ranges.
He uses that term bastardization.
Yeah, basically mixing punches up, finding tiny openings, not sticking rigidly to one type of punch, adapting on the fly.
So how does he contrast dojo punch practice with street needs?
Well, in the dojo, often it's full extension, lots of control, that hip thrust, and pulling the other hand back, hikate.
Right, hikate, that pullback for power.
Supposedly, yeah. For power, distance control fundamentals. But Thompson says on the street, that full extension is too slow, leaves you open, and the big thrust can compromise balance.
So punch shorter, faster.
And punch through the target, not just at it. He has that computer analogy, right?
Yeah, you need to program the full contact response.
Exactly. If you only train pulling punches, that's what your body will do under stress. You need to hit bags, pads, do heavy sparring to make real impact instinctive.
And the hikate, the pulling hand.
Ditch it for the street, he says. Use that hand to guard your head, your chin. Much more practical.
He also talks about stance, not using a fighting stance initially.
Yet a natural fence.
Yeah.
Hands up, but relaxed, non-threatening. Gives you the element of surprise for a preemptive strike if you need one. Less telegraphing,
Target the jaw, he says.
primarily, for the knockout potential. Body shots are less reliable in that chaos. And he suggests that little trick. Ask a question, make a statement.
Distract their brain for a split second.
Gives you an edge. But the main thing for punches, practice hitting hard, practice realistically. Bridge that dojo street gap.
Okay, now for a potentially tricky one. Blocks. Thompson's view seems quite dismissive.
It's definitely provocative. Based on watching thousands of fights, he basically says traditional blocks, as a primary defense, just don't work in the chaos of a real street encounter.
He saw them used very rarely.
Extremely rarely with any real success, he puts it bluntly. Blocks don't work. Now, he adds a caveat, maybe in a more controlled, one-on-one, almost gentlemanly scrap, they might have some limited use.
But not in the typical messy brawl.
No. The speed, the angles, the sheer aggression. There's often no time or space for those textbook movements. Plus, many blocks are designed for straight punches, which aren't the only thing coming at you.
But then he flips it, doesn't he? He says the movements themselves can be useful.
Exactly. This is the really clever part. He argues that many traditional blocking motions are actually incredibly effective attacks when repurposed.
Like a rising block becoming a forearm smash.
Right to the face. Or setting up a choke. An outside block movement becomes a hammer fist. A knife hand block. That's a chop to the neck or collarbone.
Downward block.
Hammer fist to the groin or thigh. Inside-out block could be an inverted back fist. It's about seeing the offensive potential within the defensive form.
So don't rely on them to block, but learn how to strike using those same movements.
That seems to be his core message on blocks. Reframe their application.
Which flows nicely into kata, the forms, the heart of traditional karate for many. How does Thompson view their street relevance?
He sees kata as like a hidden treasure map. He quotes his wife Sharon saying kata are whatever you want them to be, which is quite insightful.
Meaning they have multiple purposes.
Definitely. He lays out the layers.
Yeah.
Fitness first, stamina, strength, speed, power, flexibility, balance, all built through repetition.
Okay, the physical conditioning aspect.
And for the technician,
Yeah.
timing, balance, footwork, distance awareness, that focus, power, kime, and developing the right attitude, the spirit.
Kime being that sharp focus of energy at the end of a move.
Exactly, that total commitment in the technique. But the layer Thompson really emphasizes for street defense is kata as a library of hidden adaptable techniques. He points to Ina Abernethy's work on finding grappling in kata.
So the kata itself, the sequence, you probably won't do that on the street.
No, almost certainly not. But the skills developed balance, power generation, transitioning, and the individual techniques embedded within it, those are transferable if you know how to look.
Which means understanding the bunkai, the application.
Absolutely crucial. Knowing the practical meaning behind each move lets you visualize it working against a real attacker. And often, one move can have multiple applications, multiple bunkai.
Thompson found lots of stuff often overlooked.
Yeah, grappling, throws, hooks, uppercuts like we mentioned, even eye gouges, grabs, knee strikes, ankle stamps, joint attacks, headbutts, ground fighting. He argues it's all in there, hidden in plain sight within the forms.
So he encourages people to ask, what parts of this vault, as he calls it, are actually being taught in my dojo?
Right. And he stresses visualization. Really see the opponent. Imagine the bunkai working, the effect it has. Use real memories of violence, if you have them, carefully to make it more potent.
He says this visualization builds mental strength.
Strengthens the mind, improves focus, makes the responses more ingrained, more subconscious, which helps not just in fights, but in handling stress generally. The bottom line on kata, they all have hidden applications waiting to be found, like choke applications, for instance, often buried within seemingly simple movements.
Okay, moving towards more interactive practice. Set sparring. 5-step, 3-step, 1-step. These get criticized a lot for being unrealistic.
They do.
Yeah.
Thompson gets that criticism, but he argues they're a necessary foundation, like the bricklayer learning mortar mix or the pilot studying theory before flying. You need these building blocks.
Everything should have a purpose, he says.
Right. And the purpose of set sparring. Primarily teaching correct distancing, that's huge. Plus control, timing, basic footwork.
Getting that instinctive feel for range.
Exactly. Untrained people often miss because their distance is all wrong. Set sparring drills that into you. It becomes more instinctive.
But he warns about only doing semi-contact.
Yeah, the danger of negative muscle memory always pulling your blows. That's why you must progress to hitting pads and bags hard.
Contact should be a scale, he says.
From a touch all the way to full impact, if absolutely necessary. He used that baby analogy.
Yeah.
Crawl, walk with a frame, toddle, walk confidently, that's semi-free sparring, then run, all-out sparring. It's a progression.
And his key tweak to make set sparring more realistic.
Introduce fear. Actually try to hit your partner with control, but with intent.
Make them have to block properly. Make yourself attack properly.
Precisely. It forces you both to confront that flicker of fear, learn to manage it, and it instantly shows you if your techniques actually work under pressure.
Find partners who will push you a bit.
Definitely. Start controlled, he mentions. A cut lip might indicate good face control. Adjust body shots to the partner. And treat everyone the same, men, women, because threats don't discriminate. Everyone needs realistic preparation.
Okay. Which brings us to the final piece. Free sparring.
The last bit of the jigsaw, Thompson calls it. Absolutely essential. Without it, you're just doing techniques in theory. This is where you test them against someone resisting unpredictably.
The step right before a real confrontation.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
But he's critical of a lot of typical dojo free sparring, too.
Why? Because it still has too many rules.
Rules, unspoken agreements. Like breaking politely after a clinch, mostly aiming for the body, no headbutts or biting, being courteous, often aiming to just miss. Still not the street.
So he advocates for progressive sparring?
Yeah, where most rules go out the window. You might start with a kick, end up grappling on the floor, maybe a choke. If a kick gets caught, you grapple. Butting, biting, choking become possibilities at close range.
That sounds intense. What's the point?
It forces adaptation. Kickers learn to get their legs back fast. Punchers learn to move better. Non-grapplers have to learn grappling basics. It covers all ranges.
Puncher beats kicker, grappler beats puncher.
So you need to learn all three. He also suggests restricted sparring like only boxing or only grappling to shore up weak areas. He did judo and boxing himself for that reason.
But he doesn't dismiss lighter sparring entirely?
No. Semi-contact, even no contact, still have their place for trying new things without fear of getting hurt badly. But the heavy progressive stuff.
That's the forge training.
Right. Needs supervision, though. Control. Especially with biting, butting a tap is enough. Throws need mats and breakfall skills. Ground fighting should be all out, but with tapping for submissions under an expert eye. Chokes are dangerous unsupervised.
So lots of sparring types, especially heavy progressive, but always with safety gear and good instruction.
That's the message. Cover all bases, realistically, but safely.
Okay, the final section we looked at was competition fighting. Friend or Foe by Ian McRainer. This really crystallizes the difference.
McRainer puts it brilliantly. Competition is the friend. Structured, respectful bows, handshakes, referee calls like hajime and yam, the buzzer, rules.
And the techniques used are often geared towards that.
Yeah, WUKO-style competition often favors speed, control, light contact for points. Reverse punches, front punches, yurekin, fast kicks, sweeps. Things that score but don't necessarily incapacitate.
He acknowledges the skill involved, though.
Oh, absolutely. Top competitors are incredible athletes, fit, accurate, amazing timing. But then he contrasts it with the foe, the street fight.
No rules, no ref, no buzzer, no handshake usually.
And no trophy, just survival. He talks about the feeling changing from pre-competition butterflies to pre-street fight alligators. A whole different level of primal fear and intensity.
And the key difference in technique application.
Intent. On the street, you must make techniques hurt, make them stop the attack. In competition, hitting too hard gets you penalized. McRainer's final point is that real self-defense skill is the ability to stop an opponent when you need to decisively. Competition, for all its benefits, doesn't fully train that specific harsh reality.
Right. So wrapping this deep dive up, Jeff Thompson's perspective in the Pavement Arena really pushes us to look beyond standard dojo practice for street effectiveness, doesn't it?
It really does. The big takeaways are, value the basics, but know they're just a start. Cultivate that survival mindset, be mentally ready, and actively adapt your techniques. Add, subtract, modify for the sheer unpredictability of real violence.
Makes you think about your own training or just your understanding of self-defense in a different light.
Definitely. And that final proverb Thompson shares is quite powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
The iron ore feels itself needlessly tortured in the furnace, but the tempered blade looks back and knows better.
Meaning the tough, challenging adaptation process is what makes you truly effective.
Exactly. The
It
hard training, the realistic sparring, pushing boundaries, it forges something stronger.
Something to really chew on. If this got you thinking, definitely check out more of Jeff Thompson's work, or just explore these ideas of adapting martial arts further. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.